9 years passed since Harry Potter was adopted into the Evans family. As the years passed, Harry stopped visiting the Dursleys. This led Dumbledore's spies to wonder what was going on with him. Harry was living a normal life with the Evans family and they treated him like a son. Dumbledore didn't approve of this, as he believed that Lee and Mary Evans were keeping Harry away from the wizarding world. He wanted to bring Harry to Hogwarts and teach him about his past and his parents. To do this, he had to break up the Evans family and get Harry away from them. But that's only part of the story. While Harry lived with the Evanses, Agnes Parker, Patrick Harvey, Jonathan Cavanaugh, and Adrian Cavanaugh had to live with the Dursley family. Vernon and Petunia tried to protect them, but that wasn't enough. When Agnes, Jonathan, and Adrian went to school, the other students and even the teachers made fun of them because they were orphans. The bullying caused them emotional distress and affected their self-esteem. Fortunately, they found solace in one another, and they got through the difficult times. Agnes Parker gained strange powers on her 5th birthday. Those powers helped her avoid cruel children and adults who would otherwise take advantage of an orphan girl. When Agnes was 6 years old, a man tried to lure her into his car as she walked to the playground. A few minutes later, the car was set on fire with the man trapped inside. 6 months after that incident, she met a girl who lived with an abusive relative. The girl's parents and relative were arrested after Agnes introduced her new friend to Vernon and Petunia. Jonathan and Adrian Cavanaugh's grandmother, Constance Cavanaugh, was upset when she found out her grandsons were placed with the Dursleys instead of sent to her after their parents Saul and Jennifer died. She decided to file for custody of her grandsons, as she believed she would be a better guardian for them. Yet, the Dursleys argued that they had been caring for the boys for almost 2 years. They believed they could provide the boys with a more stable home life and better resources than their grandmother. Despite those claims, Vernon and Petunia refused to intervene when the boys were bullied by the other children at school. Patrick Harvey suffered as Harry would have suffered if he had stayed with the Dursleys. Even though Vernon and Petunia treated Agnes, Jonathan, and Adrian decently, they treated Patrick as an outcast. Patrick wasn't allowed to attend school or interact with other people. He was forced to do all the chores, sleep in a cupboard under the stairs, and was given minimal food and clothing. Even though Agnes, Jonathan, and Adrian weren't allowed to help or protect Patrick, they did everything they could to ease his suffering. Agnes snuck him extra food and clothing, Jonathan taught him how to read, and Adrian kept him company whenever he felt lonely. Patrick was grateful for their efforts, and he realized they had put their own safety at risk to help him. Of course, Dudley Dursley was still the spoiled brat he grew up to be in the original story. Yet with Agnes, Jonathan, and Adrian standing behind him, he stopped bullying and treating everyone around him poorly. But even he was unable to save Patrick from being abused by his own parents. This would affect Dudley's own future. As for Nicholas, a spy working for Dumbledore, he set up his office in the cupboard under the stairs where Patrick was forced to live. There, he spent most of his time observing the Dursley family and the people they interacted with. He also sent reports to Dumbledore, informing him of any suspicious activities. When he was not busy working, Nicholas would play with Patrick and teach him about magic. He became a brother figure to Patrick, offering him love and guidance. Nicholas also became a close confidant of Harry Potter, who lived with the Evans family, which spoke volumes about what Nicholas was really planning. Harry saw Nicholas as a true friend, and the two often discussed Harry's role as the biggest hero in the wizarding world. Yet Harry hated the idea of being known as the boy who lived, as he felt he was meant for better things. Nicholas agreed, telling Harry that he should try to be more than just the savior of the wizarding world, and that he should become his own person and make his own destiny. Meanwhile, Carlisle and Mary Evans became the parents of Robert Carlisle, born 1982, Marie Louise, born 1984, and twins Felix and David, born 1988. Ginger and Twyla Mobley, also born in 1982, stayed with the Evanses, for they had no family willing to take them in. When Ginger and Twyla joined the family, Lee and Mary treated them as their own by providing them with the same opportunities and love as their other children. Despite Petunia's attempts to tear the Evans family apart, Lee and Mary took good care of their children. They took the children to the park, the library, and on family trips. Lee and Mary made sure that Harry, Ginger and Twyla felt like part of the family as were their other children. Lee and Mary also made sure that their children were not affected by Petunia's caustic attitude. While Robbie, Ginger, and Twyla went to a normal school, Harry attended a special school that was a Sunday school classroom. The whole family attended church together on Sundays. Harry learned about the Bible and built relationships with the other students. Harry had no idea that this would help him when he had to deal with the wizards who expected him to be the hero they wanted him to be. Lee claimed that Harry had an extraordinary gift, one that a normal school wouldn't appreciate. Harry was smart, and he knew a lot about physics. Harry could explain relativity to his peers in an understandable and interesting way. Lee and Harry agreed that Vernon and Petunia would not have liked that at all. The Evans children weren't allowed to see their cousin Dudley Dursley, or visit their Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Lee made sure his children would never know who the Dursleys were, lest they become as cruel as them. Lee often told his children about how awful Petunia was and how he had saved Harry from Petunia's mistreatment. He did that only to remind his children and Harry that he didn't want any of them to be like Petunia. As for Jonathan and Adrian, Lola Burke, their grandmother Constance's stepdaughter, was upset that they were placed with the Dursleys. She tried to take the boys to her home in Bagdale. Constance found out and demanded that Lola give the boys back to her. This led to a bitter fight between Constance and Lola. Lola argued that Constance was not fit to take care of the boys due to a mental illness. Constance claimed that Lola was not responsible enough to be a guardian. Lola's brother Bruce Burke also claimed that Constance had abused him and Lola and spoiled her only child, Saul, the children's father. Constance denied the allegations, insisting that she had always done her part to provide for her family. But the judge stepped in and decided that Constance was a suitable guardian for the boys. The judge noted Constance's strong connection to the boys, her financial stability, and her commitment to raising them in a loving and supportive environment. Bruce was accused of abandoning his own family and having an affair with his children's American-born nanny. Lola was in a lesbian relationship, which also made her an unsuitable guardian for the boys. Bruce and Lola were humiliated when their misdeeds were revealed, but the judge's word was final. The ruling was a victory for Constance and a reminder of family values. Well, we haven't seen the last of Constance yet. She was angry that Bruce and Lola had made up lies about her abusing them and her mental illness to get the boys. Constance also swore to make the Dursleys pay for keeping her grandsons away from her until they were 6 and 7 years old. She was also determined to make the Dursleys regret their failure to protect her grandsons from bullies. She would do anything to make sure that her grandsons would never suffer again due to negligence. But that part won't be until later in the story, when the boys are at Hogwarts. We have now seen, and heard, the last of Willa Tyrell's abusive older brothers. When Willa was 8 years old, her older brothers Ars, Raphael, Martin, and Simon came to Hogwarts. Ars, the oldest, snapped, "Where is Willa?" Dozens of students gasped as he burst into a classroom, but Willa wasn't there. Amber Dumbledore was there, and she was angry. I said, "Where is Willa?" Ars snapped. Willa had been hiding behind a bookcase the whole time, but she was too scared to come out, so she stayed silent. "You don't own her," Amber snarled as she pulled out her wand. She put herself between Ars and Willa and shouted, "She doesn't have to answer to you." Ars, Raphael, Martin, and Simon stood in front of her, glaring at the Dumbledore heiress. "I don't like people like you," Amber snapped as she glared at them. "You think you have the right to talk to her in that way? If so, you have another thing coming." Martin snapped, "I don't care what you have to say, you freak. Willa lost all privileges when Mom died." "Don't make me laugh," Amber snapped. "What are you doing here?" Minerva McGonagall said as she approached Amber. She then slapped Oz across his face. "I heard what you said about Miss Willa, and I knew she was being abused, but now I see she wasn't lying at all. Get out of my school." Oz snarled in anger, but before he could respond, there was a loud explosion, accompanied by a large plume of smoke. The smell was so unbearable that Professor Snape, who overheard the confrontation and rushed to the classroom to intervene, had to evacuate the entire Slytherin dungeon. When the smoke cleared, there were 3 large piles of ashes where Oz, Raphael, and Martin had stood. Professor Snape was shocked and speechless. He had no idea what had happened. He gathered the students and ushered them outside, where they all stared in awe at the destruction that had taken place. Simon, however, was lying unconscious on the ground. As Simon was taken to the hospital wing, McGonagall stared at Willa. She was surprised that Willa had turned her cruel brothers into a smoldering pile of ashes. McGonagall had always known that Willa had a spark of magic in her, but she never thought she was capable of such a powerful spell. Yet, Willa had had enough of her brothers and was willing to crush them, even if it meant turning them into ashes. After all was said and done, Willa began sobbing. McGonagall held her tight, rocking her gently and murmuring words of comfort. She understood that while Willa had done a terrible thing, she had done it out of love. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet Oz blamed her for their mother's death. McGonagall said, "Don't worry, Willa. You will live here at Hogwarts, and we'll be your family." "But why do they hate me?" Willa cried. "What have I done to make them hate me and want to hurt me?" "I don't know," said McGonagall, "but it's nothing to worry about. They're gone for good, and you'll never see them again. Now you can live your life as if they had never been here." McGonagall smiled reassuringly. "Let's not dwell on them anymore." "But what about Dad?" Willa said as she was taken back to her dorm. "What is he going to say when he finds out that I destroyed the family?" "If anything, he'll understand why you did what you've done," Dumbledore said as he walked into Willa's dorm. "Now don't worry about your father, let us handle him. You need to rest and recover from your harrowing ordeal. I'll send Amber to keep you company." To McGonagall, he said, "Now let's make sure that Willa has no further contact with the Tyrell family, shall we?" As Willa watched the old wizards leave the dorm, she had no idea her troubles weren't over just because her brothers were now a pile of ashes being swept away by the castle's house elves. In fact, her problems were only beginning. Meanwhile, 10-year-old Harry was sitting in a corner of the dining room, trying to hide from Robbie, Felix, and David. The 3 boys in question were as thick as thieves since Felix and David were born, and they loved to annoy Harry. He needed 10 hands to count how many times they tortured him and the times he hit them back. One day, Harry was hiding in the dining room, trying to stay away from the 3 naughty boys. Nicholas saw him while preparing lunch for the boys and said to him, "Your uncle is insane." "That's something I haven't heard before," Harry said sarcastically. "No, I mean it," Nicholas said as he glared at Harry. "Vernon Dursley is the dumbest father in the world." "Why would you say that?" Harry was surprised by what Nicholas was saying about his uncle. Nicholas continued, "He drinks too much, his job is atrocious, his wife is no better, his son is spoiled, and the orphans he has aren't exactly happy to live with him." "I'm sure he has his reasons for doing the things he does," said Harry. "They're not good reasons, whatever they are," Nicholas said. "In my opinion, which no one cares to hear about, Vernon Dursley should be arrested for being a terrible man. Harry sat quietly for a second, then said, "Well, why are you telling me this?" Nicholas said, "To be honest, Vernon and Petunia Dursley have been trying to get custody of you for 9 years, but Carlisle Evans has stopped them at every opportunity. Plus, you remember when Petunia began spreading those ugly rumors about Mary Lewis, hoping to destroy Carlisle and Mary's marriage. But she failed, didn't she?" said Harry. "That's why you're still here with Carlisle and Mary instead of Vernon and Petunia," said Nicholas. He sighed as he said, "But I'm afraid our friend Patrick Harvey isn't so lucky." "Really?" said Harry. "Why? Between you and me, let's just say that Albus Dumbledore had put a spell on Patrick that's keeping him weak and docile," said Nicholas. "I mean, it's already bad enough that the boy has a mental illness that prevents him from being able to function properly, but this is beyond awful." "What do you mean?" said Harry. "Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but for now, beware of the unexpected," said Nicholas. "Nothing is as it seems, and the truth will be revealed in due time. Be cautious and don't let your guard down." Harry nodded as he left his hiding place and walked to the kitchen. There, he saw Lee and Robbie hunched over a book. He also saw the twins playing on a rug, and Mary and Louise in the kitchen preparing lunch. The smell of food wafted through the house, and the warm atmosphere was inviting. Everyone was content and relaxed, enjoying the peace of the moment. Robbie sighed, "Why are we reading this book?" Lee said to him, "Little Women is an American classic. Your Aunt Petunia used to love this book when she was a girl." "That book's for girls," Robbie snapped. "Why isn't Louise reading it?" "Because your mother's convinced that Louise isn't conforming to female roles," said Lee. "She doesn't like it when your sister plays with you and the twins instead of sitting quietly and knitting with Ginger and Twyla." He sighed as he continued, "I don't see what her problem is with Louise. I don't mind her playing with you boys, as long as she does her chores and behaves at school. But Ginger and Twyla are so boring, and Dudley's so much fun," Robbie complained. "I'd rather hang out with him instead of with the girls." "What about me?" Harry said when they looked up and saw him. "I'm your cousin too." "You're as boring as Ginger and Twyla," said Robbie. "In fact, you'd rather read than watch cartoons with us." "Cartoons are boring," said Harry. Robbie glared at him, remembering a trip to the movie theater last year to watch Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland. The screen blew up in the middle of the movie. 5-year-old Louise burst into tears, as did many of the other children in the theater. Robbie and Ginger were also upset about the screen blowing up, but they kept their cool. Twyla, however, slapped Dudley, who was also at the movies with Vernon, Petunia, and Agnes, across his face for blowing up the screen. Harry was so embarrassed that he vowed to never go to the movies again. He was sure it was all his fault that the screen blew up, as he had been the one who suggested they see Little Nemo. The movie wasn't the only thing Harry unintentionally ruined. He had ruined various birthday parties, sleepovers, and holidays. It wasn't his fault, but Mary blamed the Dursleys for the disasters that occurred in the Evans house. Not only that, Petunia found out about the incidents. She filed numerous police reports, claiming that Lee and Mary were abusing their children, and not sending them to stay with her at her house during the weekends. But when the police investigated those claims, they found that all the children were in good health and there was no evidence of abuse or neglect in the home. But Petunia vowed to do whatever it took to save Harry, and get her brother away from his wife. But no matter how hard she tried, Lee was always 2 steps ahead of her. Petunia was becoming desperate and frustrated, knowing that she had to outsmart Lee and get her brother away from his wife. She was determined to succeed, no matter the cost. As Harry wandered around the living room, he stared at a plate of cookies that Mary had baked earlier. She was now showing Louise how to make soup. Harry reached out and touched the cookies, causing the entire plate to explode. Everyone gasped as they ducked under the couch pillows as cookie remains rained down upon them. The twins laughed and ran around the living room, gobbling up the bigger pieces of the cookies. Lee shook his head, knowing the boys would not eat their lunch anymore. Robbie and Twyla plugged up the vacuum cleaner and sucked away the tiny crumbs the twins missed. Ginger buried her face in her book, ignoring everything going on around her. Harry stood in the middle of the living room, not knowing what was going on. He had no idea what had happened and appeared in a daze. In fact, he didn't hear Mary calling his name until Louise splashed a huge cup of water on him. "Harry, are you all right?" Mary asked. "I think so," said Harry, "but why am I all wet?" "It's that Petunia Dursley again," Lee muttered as he gave Harry a towel to dry himself off. "I swear, that woman has been nothing but trouble from the start." "Well, she's your sister," said Mary. "And between her and Lily, I don't know who's worse. Not to mention her fat and ugly husband and their pig of a son," said Lee. "I don't understand how my sister could have married a man like him. Plus, I feel sorry for that little girl who lives with them. She needs help and perhaps a permanent vacation from them." Harry went to the front porch and sat in a large chair in front of the large bay window. He had to think. Something was clearly wrong with him, or he wouldn't have blown up the cookies. He had been feeling off for weeks, but he had never expected it to manifest itself in such an explosive way. He had to figure out what was wrong before it happened again. Just then, Nicholas approached him, saying, "If I were you, I would be careful for the next few weeks. Petunia has been trying to get her hands on you." "But why would she do that?" said Harry. "We both know that she's no good." "Not to worry, because the moment she finally gets you away from Lee Evans, she'll regret it forever," said Nicholas. "Just you wait and see." "But why would she do that?" Harry asked again. Nicholas smiled. "Trust me, she'll be sorry. And by the time you're done with her, she'll be wishing she had never set her eyes on you." Nicholas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "Here, take this. It will help you in your quest." He handed it to Harry, who examined it in awe. "Good luck," Nicholas said. Harry frowned, knowing that even though things were bad for him now, things would be so much worse for him the following year.